As Liam and Owen made their way through the hallway, trying to avoid detection by the adults, they spotted Dr. Williams and Dr. Yen at the far end of another corridor. Quickly, they veered off into another path, hoping to avoid the two. However, Dr. Williams caught sight of them as they darted past and crossed the three-way split of the corridor crossroads to the other side of the hallway. His brows furrowed in concern as Anna appeared shortly afterward. "Are you looking for Owen and Liam, Miss Morris?" Williams called out to her. "Yes, please," Anna responded, her voice carrying down the hallway. Williams chuckled and gestured for her to continue in the direction she was headed. Yen joined in his amusement as Anna threw her hands up in exasperation and continued on her way. Moments later, Dr. Fields arrived, hurrying toward Dr. Williams and Dr. Yen. "I see the twins are making your morning quite eventful," Williams remarked with a teasing tone. Yen chuckled, while Cassandra, catching up to them, added, "They vehemently objected to getting undressed in front of us girls." Her explanation elicited laughter from both Williams and Yen. Together, the three of them proceeded down the hallway towards the first wards. They were soon joined by several nurses, two of whom accompanied them and gave Dr. Fields patients' medical data as they began moving from one patient's room to the next. As the trio approached the third patient's room, Dr. Fields lowered her gaze at the medical data tablet and briefed her colleagues. "Our third patient is Mr. Olson," she began. "He's recovering from a kidney transplant. Post-surgery, he's on tacrolimus, mycophenolate mofetil, and low-dose prednisone to prevent rejection. Pain management has been handled with acetaminophen, and his vitals have been stable." Dr. Yen nodded in acknowledgement, and Dr. Williams gave a brief glance toward the room, signaling readiness. Inside, the room was calm and well lit, with pale blue walls and a window letting in natural light. Mr. Olson was propped up in bed, appearing more alert than Cassandra expected. She walked closer to the bed with a reassuring smile. "Good morning, Mr. Olson. How are you feeling today?" she probed with a professional yet warm smile. "Better, thank you, doctor," the man replied, his voice low and tinged with fatigue. Cassandra then gestured toward Dr. Yen and Dr. Williams, who had come close to the bed, too. "This is Dr. Yen, our visiting surgeon, and Dr. Williams, our diagnostics expert. They're here to assist with your recovery." Dr. Yen moved closer to the bed with a polite smile, gesturing to the attending nurse to expose the incision area. The lady quickly did as directed, opening the man's hospital robe and revealing the bandages. Yen then reviewed the surgical site. She adjusted the bandage gently to inspect the incision. "The wound looks clean and is healing well. Any tenderness or unusual discomfort around this area?" she probed with laser focus. "Just a little soreness, but nothing bad," Mr. Olson responded. Dr. Williams checked the monitors and the patient's chart before saying, "Are you experiencing any side effects from the medications, such as nausea, fatigue, or changes in appetite?" Mr. Olson shook his head. "No, nothing out of the ordinary, doctor." Dr. Fields nodded approvingly. Dr. Yen then turned to the nurse. "Let's check his magnesium levels today and monitor his renal function markers closely. If there's a drop in electrolytes, we'll add supplements." The nurse nodded as she said, "Yes, Dr. Yen." Dr. Williams then added, "Keep an eye on his temperature and any signs of infection. If he reports anything unusual, escalate immediately." "Yes, doctor," the nurse promptly responded. After reassuring Mr. Olson and noting his progress, the team exited the room and headed out. Before entering the next room, Dr. Fields updated them. "Our next patient is Miss Ivanoff. She had a severe allergic reaction after cutting herself on a seashell while surfing abroad. She's stable now after epinephrine, diphenhydramine, and hydrocortisone. We've also started her on cefuroxime and metronidazole for wound infection prevention." They entered the room, which had a calm yet clinical atmosphere. Miss Ivanoff, a young woman in her 20s, lay on the bed, her face slightly flushed. She looked up as they entered, managing a small smile. Dr. Fields approached first. "Good morning, Miss Ivanoff. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," she said, her voice still a bit hoarse. "My breathing has improved," she added as her eyes bounced around the medical practitioners in the room. Dr. Yen stepped closer to examine the wound. She gently lifted the dressing with a pensive frown. The inflammation is going down and the wound looks clean. We'll continue with the antibiotics and add a topical corticosteroid to reduce the swelling further. Dr. Williams studied the patient's vitals on the monitor before turning to the attending nurse. Let's run an allergen panel when she's stable enough to determine the specific trigger. Keep the nebulizer ready in case her breathing worsens. But for now, monitor her response to the current treatment. He instructed. Yes, Dr. Williams, the nurse responded with a polite nod. Dr. Fields then added, make sure the antibiotics are administered on schedule and note any further reactions, no matter how minor. They assured Miss Carter of her progress before exiting the room. Outside, they exchanged brief notes on adjustments to the treatment plans and continued to the next patient on their rounds. Early on, Rowan, who had gone looking for Ethan, was informed that he was in the clinic chapel with Sheriff Logan. Having grown somewhat familiar with the hospital's layout after Anita and Miss Mabel White's tour the day before, Rowan made his way there. Upon entering the timeless sanctuary, his eyes immediately settled on the two men seated on one of the painted benches, their voices low as they spoke in hushed tones. Overhead, Gothic-inspired chandeliers cast a muted glow, their light adding a gentle warmth to the sacred stillness. Rowan's gaze traveled upward to the vaulted ceilings, painted in soft, calming hues that stretched skyward, holding whispers of solace within their graceful arches. His attention then shifted to the stained glass windows, which bathed the room in a kaleidoscope of warm light, the colors dancing subtly across the surfaces they touched. Lowering his eyes, he took in the altar at the front of the pews, a striking centerpiece carved with delicate intricacy. Its white marble seemed to glow softly against the vibrant red carpet that grounded the room. On either side of the altar stood twin side altars adorned with golden niches and small floral arrangements, simple yet elegant tributes of devotion. The air was still, disturbed only by the occasional creak of the wooden floor or the faint hum of activity from the hospital beyond. Ethan, hearing the sound of creaking floorboards, glanced in that direction and saw Rowan. "Ah, are you a man of faith, Dr. Rowan, or like me? Are you running from the inevitable, or have you come to bare your soul?" He teased, his tone half serious. He had suspected Arya wouldn't begin Ian's surgery without his presence, though he had hoped she might forego tradition just this once and spare him the emotional weight of it all. "No such luck. I'm not really into religion," Rowan replied, as he strode toward the other men, slipping his hands into his pockets. "It never did much good for me," he added almost to himself, but both Ethan and Sheriff Logan heard him. "You're an atheist?" Ethan asked, lifting his left eyebrow comically. "Not particularly. I think I'm more of a humanist. I'm not sure about the existence of any deity, so I just focus on what I see and know, human values and ethics," Rowan said with a polite smile, noticing the sheriff watching him with interest. "That's an interesting take. I've never met a humanist before, but don't you think it's kind of the same thing, though? The New Testament was all about love, acceptance, and human values, but sometimes people mix in a bit of the Old Testament to suit their purposes. It's funny how we manage to muddle it all up. I mean, Jesus thought the old ways were flawed and needed fixing, but humans are set in their ways," Ethan quipped. Rowan and Sheriff Logan chuckled. "I'm surprised you still have any faith left in you, Blackwood. With everything you've been through, I guess some of us are tougher than most. It's hard to believe in divinity when bad things happen to the people you love." "Good people. It's really damn hard," the sheriff said with a sigh. "I'm with you on that. It's hard to understand it sometimes. Children getting sick and dying, the wicked at the top always trampling on us little folks. But an encounter with spirituality now and then nudges you to consider there's a world we don't see. Still, it can feel partial and cruel. I never had a father's love, only the love of one parent that mattered. Then some people came into my life and made it bearable. And when I met Nathaniel Hawthorne, I forgot what oppression, hunger, or need meant," Ethan said in a low, gruff tone. "Not everyone is that lucky, Blackwood," Rowan said. Ethan nodded in agreement. "I know," Ethan murmured. A moment of silence passed before Rowan broke it. "We found out that Ian Blackwood has borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. That means the cancer is near major blood vessels but hasn't spread beyond the area. So, we're operating. We'll follow it up with chemotherapy or radiation therapy to shrink the tumor and reduce the risk of complications. Right now, though, Arya needs you to speak to him, just in case," Rowan said, meeting Ethan's gaze and holding it. Ethan let out a sigh and stood up. "What you're doing is nothing short of remarkable. Ian is a friend, and I can tell you that he hurts 10 times more whenever he hurts you or your mother. Some of us just have demons we can't overcome." "As your father's friend, I say thank you," Sheriff Logan said. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. He simply nodded and strode away. Rowan gave the sheriff a small nod before following after Ethan. Meanwhile, Nathaniel, Alex, Jake, Aiden, and Charles had joined Arya in Ian's room. When Ethan entered with Rowan, Arya was in a corner speaking with Nathaniel, briefing him on their findings. Ethan's gaze fell on Ian, whose eyes were open and focused on him. The resemblance between them was immediately evident, and Ethan recoiled internally at the thought. Yet his heart tightened at the unexpected warmth etched into Ian's face and eyes. It was a stark contrast to the usual cold disdain the older man directed at him, and it was unsettling. "Dr. Bennett, Nurse Jane, let's give the patient a moment before we move him," Arya said as soon as she noticed Ethan. Nathaniel and Alex caught the panicked look Ethan shot in Arya's direction. "We'll stay," Nathaniel said to Arya when she reached for his hand to draw him away. Arya met his gaze and nodded in understanding before leaving with Rowan, Juliet, Aiden, Charles, and Jake. Out in the corridor, Jake noticed Owen and Liam running towards them, giggling. "Uncle Jake!" Owen cried out upon spotting him. "Save us!" Liam echoed. Jake scooped both boys up just as Anna Morris appeared at the far end of the hallway. "You two!" she called, her voice cutting through the corridor. The boys squealed and clung tightly to Jake as he chuckled. "What did they do now?" Arya asked with a faint smile. "They ran off because apparently they don't want to undress in front of us girls," Anna replied with a straight face, adding air quotes around the term girls. Rowan, Jake, Aiden, and Charles burst out laughing. Arya giggled, turning away to compose herself, then took a deep breath before looking at her boys, who were still giggling and clinging to Jake. Before Arya could speak, Rowan interjected, "Why don't I help? I'll follow Miss Morris and assist with the boys' checkup, then come back to join you." He stepped closer to Jake. "Yes!" Owen shouted in triumph. "Woo! No way we're letting girls see us in our underwear," Liam added, scrunching up his nose. This time Arya couldn't hold back and burst out laughing. She moved closer to tweak Liam's nose, her smile beaming as laughter echoed through the hallway. "Let me accompany you, Dr. Rowan and Miss Morris, so I can help keep these two in check," Jake offered, carrying the twins as he started walking. Rowan and Anna flanked him, the three chatting as they made their way down the corridor. And then Liam suddenly asked, "Uncle Rowan, do you have a girlfriend?" His brows furrowed in thought, catching the older man off guard. No. Why?" Rowan replied, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "Nothing, I just wanted to know," Liam said casually. Jake arched an eyebrow at him, and Liam giggled before burying his face in the crook of Uncle Jake's neck. He then whispered, "Miss Grace Hamilton doesn't have a boyfriend either." Pulling back, he grinned at Jake, baring his small teeth. Jake shook with laughter. "So you're playing matchmaker now?" Jake asked, amused. He asked her if she had a boyfriend, and when she said no, and asked why he wanted to know, he told her it was for his uncles. "It was the most embarrassing thing ever," Owen said, shaking his head. Jake laughed harder. "But we have so many uncles who don't have girlfriends. There's Uncle Stephen, Uncle Gabriel, Uncle Jordan, Uncle Josh, Uncle Seth." Liam continued, rattling off the Hawthorne guards' names with ease, making Jake feel quietly proud of the boy's memory. Rowan, listening to the hushed whispers, chuckled, wondering who Grace Hamilton was. As they walked past a corridor marked Ward C, Jake noticed Lewis and Will flanking a door, their guns drawn and ready. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he wondered who might be behind the closed door. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the hallway, followed by a loud scream. Rowan froze, his face pale. "Was that Yen?" he exclaimed. Liam and Owen clung tightly to their Uncle Jake, their small hands gripping his shirt. Anna Morris's eyes widened in alarm, her gaze flickering toward the source of the noise. Early on, Cassandra Fields, Kim Yen, and Dr. Williams were on their 10th patient of the morning when the door swung open, drawing their attention. Cassandra glanced in that direction, expecting to see one of the nurses, but instead it was Doug. She held her breath as his gaze swept from her to Yen and around the room. It was clear he was looking for Juliet, and the anger growing in his cold eyes made her uneasy. "Where the hell is Juliet?" he demanded, his voice filled with exasperation. "Good morning, mister," Cassandra began, but her words faltered as Doug pulled out a gun and aimed it at her. "Now let's all calm down," Dr. Williams interjected, stepping forward, which caused Doug to shift the gun toward him. The patient on the bed, an elderly woman of about 65 years, scoffed with evident irritation. "You've got something to say, bitch," Doug snapped at her. The woman rolled her eyes and settled back comfortably on the bed. "You will take me to her right now, or this old crow gets it," Doug threatened, waving the gun in Cassandra's direction. "Who are you calling an old crow?" the woman bellowed. "Shut up!" Doug yelled at her. Cassandra raised her hands, trying to keep calm. Behind Dr. Williams, Yen, who was conveniently shielded by him, slowly retrieved her phone, sent an SOS to Will, and slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. "You don't tell me what to do. We know what you did killing your father," the elderly woman started, but she didn't get to finish. Doug pointed the gun at her and fired, hitting the woman square in the shoulder. Her loud scream of pain echoed through the room. Yen screamed in disbelief. Cassandra stood frozen, too stunned to make a sound, while Dr. Williams cursed loudly and moved to help the injured woman. Doug immediately trained the gun on him, halting him in his tracks. The older woman's pain-filled grunts filled the room, a haunting backdrop to the tense standoff. Doug then turned the gun back to Cassandra and barked, "Move!" It took her a moment to react, frozen in shock, but when he locked the gun on her again, she took a hesitant step. Williams moved to block Doug's view and offered, "Why don't I take you? I know exactly where she is." "Did I ask you, old man?" Doug snarled at him. "Step aside or you'll join that old crow soon enough." Williams knew Doug had made a grave mistake. In a hospital teeming with Hawthorne guards, reinforcements would arrive soon if they weren't already on their way. All they needed to do was play it safe. "Move or you die," Doug bellowed. "What do you want with Dr. Bennett?" Williams asked. "That's none of your business," Doug snapped. He shoved Williams out of the way, causing him to fall over the bed and onto the dead woman. Doug grabbed Cassandra by the forearm in a crushing grip, dragging her toward the exit, while keeping his back partially turned to Yen and Williams. "Open the door," he growled at Cassandra. "You try anything and I'll blow your cute little face off." Cassandra nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the door. Meanwhile, in Ian Blackwood's room, Nathaniel and Alex stood silently in a corner, observing. Ethan lingered awkwardly at the foot of the hospital bed, his hands buried in his pockets. His unease was evident. He clearly wanted to be anywhere but there. Nathaniel kept his gaze lowered, his attention focused on the conversation. "I can't believe you and Arya are helping me," Ian said, his voice rough and low. "But thank you. I had already accepted that my time on this earth was coming to an end." "You made that crystal clear when you crashed my mother's funeral uninvited, Ian," Ethan replied sharply. "But let's cut the shit. If you had truly decided to die, you wouldn't have attended, you wouldn't have written that letter, and wouldn't have been careless enough to let Benedict get hold of your will. But you did all those things because you knew we wouldn't just let you die," he added, his voice laced with irritation. He really didn't like the feeling of getting conned by Ian. "I'm sorry," Ian said softly. "I know forgiveness is too much to ask, especially after your mother." "Don't you dare mention my mother," Ethan interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm sorry, son," Ian said again, his tone heavy with regret. "I truly am." Ethan scoffed, dropping his gaze. Looking at Ian only stirred feelings he didn't want to confront, feelings Ian had no right to evoke. Ian turned toward Alex and Nathaniel. Meeting Alex's eyes, he said, "Thank you, Sterndale. And you, Hawthorne, for standing by my boy." Alex nodded slightly, unsure how to respond. Nathaniel met Ian's gaze directly, unwavering. "Give him time," Nathaniel said in a calm tone. Let's hope Arya and her team can buy you the time you need also. Otherwise, it would be a great shame you missed the chance to have a meaningful relationship with your son. He's one of the best people I've ever known." Ian nodded, his lips trembling as tears welled in his eyes. Nathaniel turned and walked toward the door, Alex following. As Ethan moved to leave with them, Ian called out, "Son?" Ethan stiffened, his jaw tightening as he reluctantly turned to face him. Deep down, he hated how he'd already begun to acknowledge the bond they shared, despite himself. "Don't spare Diana or her children on my account," Ian said. "They wanted both of us dead," he said, and Ethan recognized the familiar, harsh tone in his voice, the same one that used to intimidate him. He hardened his heart, determined not to let it get to him. "You know what's jarring right now?" Ethan said, his voice tight with restrained anger. "The fact that you think I'm here to fight your battles for you, or that I'd even be willing to. Yes, Diana and her children will pay for what they did accordingly. But make no mistake, Ian, I'm nothing like you. I'm not going on some vendetta to get a pound of flesh. If they attack me, I'll defend myself. Don't get it twisted." His words were nearly forced through gritted teeth as he turned and walked out. Ian let out a sigh, a subtle smile of pride in the man his son had become etched on his face. "You okay, man?" Alex asked as soon as Ethan stepped outside. Ethan couldn't help but notice how Alex, Nathaniel, and Arya surrounded him with concern etched on their faces. It made his irritation ease off, and he allowed a faint smile to appear on his face. He silently thanked God again for the day his path crossed theirs. "Yeah, I'm fine. He's all yours, Ariana," Ethan replied with a smirk. Arya nodded, offering him a cautious smile, still seemingly trying to gauge his mood. Ethan wasn't entirely fine, but he knew now wasn't the time to dwell on it. There were others present, the red-headed doctor waiting nearby with a nurse, along with Aidan and Charles. If it had just been Nathaniel and his men, he might have let some of his guard down. Instead, he resolved to push Ian out of his mind, reminding himself yet again that the man meant nothing to him. "Dr. Bennett, let's get to it," Arya said, her tone brisk. Juliet acknowledged the command with a nod, then moved with the nurse back into Ian's hospital room. Arya followed close behind, but as she was about to step inside, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot rang out. It was faint, but everyone heard it, followed by a distant scream. "What was that?" Alex exclaimed. Arya froze mid-step as if struck by lightning. Her horrified eyes darted to Nathaniel. "My babies," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Nathaniel felt his heart skip a beat. "Boss, take Dr. Hawthorne inside while I investigate," Aidan said firmly, already moving. Charles immediately began ushering Arya, Nathaniel, Ethan, and Alex into the room. "Please go inside, boss," Charles said when Nathaniel hesitated, with his broad chest heaving, his gaze following Aidan as he sprinted down the hallway. "We've got enough hands. The children are fine. Jake is with them," Charles quickly reassured him, his words low but urgent. It was as if he could read Nathaniel's thoughts with just one glance. Nathaniel slowly nodded, his jaw tightening as he glanced at his gold wristwatch. He mentally counted the seconds, silently deciding how much time he would give Aidan before going after his children himself. Earlier in the day, before Will left Yen's cottage, knowing she would be going to the hospital with Dr. Hawthorne and the others. Aware of the dangers lurking all around them, he had given her a set of rules. The first was to always stay close to Dr. Hawthorne, knowing Andrew, Charles, or Aidan would always be near, or for her to stay close to Dr. Hart, knowing Jake would prioritize his woman and child. The second rule was for her to try and reach him to give him updates. When he heard the ping of his phone, he quickly checked it. The simple SOS made his heart slam against his chest. He immediately pulled his gun, startling the nurse and patient who crossed his and Lewis's path. "Whoa, so sorry," Lewis quickly apologized as the nurse glared at them and continued with the patient, who kept looking back at them. "What happened?" Lewis asked with keen interest. Will showed him the message, then broke into a run. Lewis, remembering that Cassandra was with Yen and Williams, rushed after him. The two made their way to the ward where they had last seen them. Listening to voices from inside the rooms, they finally located the one they were looking for. Lewis heard the bastard threatening Cassandra, and though he readied his gun, He knew they had to stay calm to avoid spooking the guy into shooting anyone. Then they heard the gunshot, followed by Yen's scream. Will could barely hold himself back, but Lewis gestured for him to listen. Gathering that the idiot intended for Cassandra to take him to Juliet, they waited. Lewis gestured to Adam that he would grab Cassandra and Will should take care of Doug. Will nodded, and the two prepared as the door began to open. Down the hallway, Jake felt torn for a moment. He considered going to back up Will and Lewis, but he was holding Liam and Owen, and the triplets were further down the hallway with his very pregnant fiancée. Letting out a low growl as he made up his mind, he said to Rowan and Miss Morris, "Will and Lewis will take care of them. Let's get you all to safety." He ushered them forward. He noticed Rowan's hesitation, but was relieved when the man used common sense and obeyed. Rushing down the hallway, Jake observed how Miss Morris stayed close, patting the boys' backs, while Rowan tried to shield him and the boys in case the armed men appeared. Reaching the doorway to the pediatric section, Rowan found it locked and banged on it hard. Jake saw Noria peek through a broken glass pane, and then he heard Evangeline's voice. "Is it them?" Evangeline asked, her tone laced with worry. Jake quickly looked around, realizing her words meant someone had been there earlier. "No, it's Jake," Noria called out, and the door was quickly opened. A collective sigh of relief spread through the room when they saw it was Jake with Anna, Rowan, and the twins. Jake pressed a kiss to the boys' heads as they clung to him, unwilling to let go. Claire and Miss Devereaux took the twins from him to help carry them. "Stay with us, Uncle Jake," Owen said, worry etched on his small face. "Yes, Uncle Jake, don't go," Liam added, his eyes filled with concern. "Go? Are you kidding me? I'm not leaving you, your brother, Aunt Eva, Aunt Anna, Aunt Isla, Aunt Claire," he said, pausing to glance at a woman standing back holding one of the triplets. Then he added with a comical flair, "And whoever that lady is, got it?" Liam and Owen giggled before Liam whispered loudly, "Miss Grace Hamilton," nodding as if sharing a great secret. "Oh, that Miss Grace Hamilton. Cool. Cool," Jake replied, playing along. The ladies, momentarily distracted by Jake's playful conversation with the boys, didn't notice how he kept scanning the room, rushing to the windows to look out. His focus remained on ensuring there were no vulnerabilities an assailant could exploit to enter, aside from the door. When his eyes met Evangeline's, she subtly asked if the attack had anything to do with Luke Greetham. Jake shook his head and she sighed in relief. Jake shot a pointed look at Rowan, Evangeline, Claire, and Anna, silently asking for a distraction for the boys. The four immediately caught on and shifted into action. "All right, let's get to that checkup, boys," Rowan announced, gesturing for them to follow him. Evangeline waddled over to the twins, cradling her stomach with one hand while Anna joined her. Together, they reached out to hold each boy's hand, ushering them after Rowan. Isla followed, carrying Mason, and Claire walked with her while Miss Everly stayed in the reception area with Landon. As Evangeline glanced back, she saw Jake pull out his gun and quietly slip out of the room. She whispered a silent prayer for his safety before turning her attention back to the children. Outside, Jake hurried down the hallway to the left of the pediatric ward. Upon reaching the end of the hall, he pressed his back against the wall and saw two men approaching from the opposite direction, one holding a crowbar, the other a gun. Jake waited until they were close enough before dropping to his knees. Guns drawn, he slid sideways out of hiding to face the men. He managed to fire one shot, but the second man went down before he could fire again. Aiden strode down the hallway, a gun in one hand and a knife in the other. Jake exhaled a relieved breath. "Where are the children?" Aiden asked as he walked purposefully toward Jake. Jake got to his feet. "Pediatric ward. Noria, Claire, Miss Devereaux, Miss Anna, Miss Everly?" Aiden pressed, wanting confirmation that everyone was safe. "They're fine," Jake assured him as they both headed back towards the pediatric ward. Aiden nodded, pulled out his phone, and called Charles to report that the children were safe. On the other end, Charles put the call on speaker so Nathaniel, who was already pacing like a caged lion, could hear the update. Alex let out a relieved sigh. "Who was it? Was it Doug?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Aiden replied from the other end. "But Will and Lewis got him," he added. A few minutes earlier, back at the entrance where Doug had Cassandra, Yen, and Dr. Williams trapped, Cassandra obeyed his orders and opened the door. As she stepped outside, the first thing that alerted her to Lewis's presence was his scent. Her heart pounded as she recalled how he had handled Todd and Doug the previous day. Watching Doug coldly shoot an old woman without remorse had already shaken her, and now she feared what Lewis might do. Before she could take another step, she felt herself snatched up like a chick caught by an eagle. Enclosed in a warm embrace, Lewis held her trembling body for a brief moment. He didn't want her to see what Will was doing to Doug. As soon as Dr. Fields stepped out and Will saw that a gun was not pressed directly against her back, he trusted Lewis to handle his part while he took care of his own. The moment Lewis pulled Dr. Fields to safety, Will seized the hand Doug was using to hold the gun and tore the weapon away. Doug reflexively pulled the trigger, sending a stray bullet ricocheting off the floor and wall. Unfazed, Will slammed Doug into the doorframe, then threw him hard against the floor and wall as Doug struggled to fight back. Doug managed to land a few hits, but Will countered with a brutal headbutt to his face. He followed up with a relentless series of punches to Doug's face and chest, striking repeatedly until the large man finally went limp. Even then, Will didn't loosen his grip. He began dragging Doug across the cold floor, clearly intending to haul him outside and turn him over to the sheriff. Inside the room, Dr. Williams, upon seeing Lewis's profile at the door, immediately began tending to the injured older woman, with Yen stepping in to help. After a moment, Yen ran to the door and peered outside to see who had come to their rescue. She saw Will dragging Doug down the hallway, and a smile broke across her face. "That's my man," the thought echoed in her mind as she bit her lower lip. Lewis released Cassandra, drawing Yen's attention. "Are you okay?" Yen asked Cassandra. The other woman nodded, offering a small smile. "I am now. Thank you." Yen nodded in response. "Thank you, Lewis," she added, before turning back inside to help Dr. Williams. Lewis's chest rose and fell heavily, partly from adrenaline and partly from fear. For a moment, he had been terrified that Doug would shoot Cassandra in the back, but none of that showed in his face. "Thank you," Cassandra said softly. Lewis nodded, his gaze dropping to the bruises on her forearm. "Does that hurt?" he asked. Cassandra glanced at the red marks on her arm and gave a slight nod. "A little," she whispered. Lewis gave another small nod in acknowledgement. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, stepping back from Cassandra before following the path Will had taken. Will made sure to drag Doug out of the hospital along the fire escape route to the side of the building and into the snow. Adam, who had gone to inform the sheriff about Doug and his men's invasion, followed the trail of blood on the floor. He returned with the sheriff and one of his deputies to the side of the building. Sheriff Logan flinched when he saw Doug's bloodied face and the way the man was thrown onto the snow-covered ground without care, as if he were trash. He came to stand beside Lewis and, peering down at Doug, let out a sigh. Doug groaned and tried to get up. "I thought we had a deal, Doug," Sheriff Logan said. Doug spat blood onto his boot. "Cuff him," Sheriff Logan directed his deputy. The young deputy began to read Doug his rights as he moved behind him to grab his hands. "You have the right to remain silent." But before he could finish, Doug snatched his hand away, and as if knowing the deputy usually kept a knife holstered to his ankle, Doug reached for the man's ankle, pulled out the knife, and immediately buried it in the deputy's arm. A loud cry echoed in the cold air as Doug yanked the knife out. With a wild roar, he made to stab the deputy again. The young man tried to skitter backward, but he wasn't fast enough. Sheriff Logan and Lewis pulled out their guns and shot him at the same time. The sheriff's bullet hit Doug in the shoulder, while Lewis aimed for his heart. Doug's face grew still in horror as he choked on his own blood. He fell backward onto the snow and began to shake violently. "We should probably call the nurses," Adam suggested, watching Doug choke on his own blood. "Yeah, we should," Lewis replied in a dry tone, though he didn't move to go back inside. Will helped the deputy to his feet and started heading inside with him, offering support. "Did he hurt anyone else?" the sheriff asked, his voice filled with concern. "He shot an old lady. The doctors are taking care of her," Lewis said. The sheriff nodded, seemingly satisfied that he had a reason not to try and help Doug. While the sheriff made a call to the morgue, two familiar trucks pulled into the hospital parking lot. Lewis noticed Ash getting out of his vehicle, walking toward them, just as Andrew stepped out with Miss Reynolds at the far end of the lot. When Ash approached and saw Doug lying there in the snow, his eyes frozen in death, he asked, "Please tell me he suffered." "Will got him," Adam supplied. "Would have preferred Aiden or Charles, but Will too is okay, I guess," Ash said with a deadpan expression, then headed inside. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Nathaniel instructed Jake and Aiden to stay with the children while the other Hawthorne guards conducted a sweep of the hospital grounds for the rest of Doug's men. "Doug is not a man to be spared. It would be like having pity on a viper," Ian supplied in a worried tone. Charles wanted to respond that the man was dead but held back because of Dr. Hawthorne. Nathaniel, noticing the sidelong glance Charles threw at Ian, moved closer to him and asked, "Update?" Charles nodded and said, "Threat neutralized," his voice low. Nathaniel nodded in satisfaction, then turned to Arya and said, "You can proceed with your surgery while I go be with our kids." Arya nodded in gratitude, understanding that Nathaniel's way of telling her things was back to normal. At the hospital reception, Hawthorne guards worked with district security personnel to get everything back in order. Soon enough, Jake and Aiden, joined by Ash, started to drag out dead and wounded men outside where the sheriff was. Before Nathaniel stepped out of the hospital room, as Dr. Bennett and a nurse prepared to wheel Ian out, he pressed a kiss to the top of Arya's hair, gently cupping the nape of her neck in a gesture of reassurance. He then turned and headed toward the door. Charles, who was standing by the door, promptly opened it, waiting for Nathaniel to step through. "Nathan?" Arya called softly, causing him to pause mid-step. He turned to look at her and she said, "Be safe." Nathaniel held her gaze for a moment, nodded in acknowledgement and left the room. In the hallway, Charles was about to suggest calling for backup to ensure at least one Hawthorne guard would be present to stand watch over Dr. Hawthorne. Before he could speak, Ash and Andrew appeared at the end of the corridor, accompanied by Anita. Charles let out a sigh of relief. Anita greeted Nathaniel with a brief side hug before heading inside. Charles stayed behind to guard Dr. Hawthorne, while Andrew patted him on the back and followed Nathaniel, with Ash trailing close behind. "Ash," Charles called after him. When Ash glanced back, Charles added, "Tell Claire to call me." Ash nodded and continued walking. "I'm sorry there was an attack, boss. We were trying to respect Sheriff Logan's authority and not alienate him just yet," Andrew said as he walked alongside Nathaniel, with Alex and Ethan keeping pace. "Yeah, I figured as much. Let's be thankful nobody got hurt," Nathaniel replied. "Thanks for understanding," Andrew said. "No worries. How did the visit go?" Nathaniel asked. "Couldn't have been better, although I get the feeling the uncle has reservations about me being a security operative," Andrew replied with a chuckle. He omitted the part about how he and Anita were almost attacked and how Ash's timely intervention had saved them, so much so that Anita believed their supposed chance encounter with Ash on the road back was entirely coincidental. "Anita didn't strike me as someone who concerns herself with others' opinions," Nathaniel commented. "Oh, she doesn't," Andrew said. "She told him and his wife there are 4 topics she expects not to be brought up: race, politics, religion, and her husband-to-be's profession." Nathaniel, Ethan, and Alex chuckled at that. "I was incredibly uncomfortable during the first 3 minutes we were there," Andrew added, laughing along with the others. "She is unapologetically blunt," Alex remarked. "That she is," Andrew replied, his tone filled with clear fondness. The 5 continued chatting as they made their way down the hallway. At the far end, Adam appeared just in time to see Dr. Hawthorne, a nurse, and Juliet, assisted by Charles, pushing a wheeled bed carrying Ian Blackwood. Juliet glanced at Adam, their eyes meeting briefly. Her brow furrowed slightly and her eyes softened, the subtle tilt of her head revealing the concern behind her calm demeanor as she searched his face for reassurance. Adam returned her gaze, his eyes reflecting his concern for her. Juliet gave him a small nod, which he acknowledged with a blink as he sighed before quickly moving to assist Charles with the bed. The women stepped aside to let them pass. Juliet didn't fully understand what Doug had done, why he had done it, or what had happened to him and Todd. She was simply relieved that whatever the situation had been, it was now under control. Strangely, Adam's presence brought her a sense of safety she hadn't expected, leaving her feeling unsure of how to process the emotion. She wasn't someone who relied on others to protect her, but the knowledge that someone cared enough to somewhat be her personal guard, especially a man she likely wouldn't see again after he left Alaska, made her feel, unexpectedly, special. As Nathaniel reached the corridor leading to the pediatric ward, he spotted Jake, Aiden, and Sheriff Logan standing near the entrance. As they got closer, Nathaniel overheard Sheriff Logan asking, "I trust the ladies and children are all safe and accounted for?" Jake nodded and answered, "Yes, everyone's fine." "Thanks, Sheriff." The older man nodded in response and added, "And, Helena, she's here?" Nathaniel caught Aiden's sharp glance and chuckled. "Yes, Miss Everly is with the children," Jake replied, a subtle smile playing at the corner of his lips. "May I?" Sheriff Logan asked, gesturing towards the closed door behind the two tall men. But before Jake could respond, Aiden spotted Nathaniel and his group approaching. "Boss," he said, prompting the sheriff to turn around. "Mr. Hawthorne?" The older man greeted with a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Sheriff Logan?" Nathaniel responded courteously. "I assume you've heard about Doug breaking his deal with me and meeting his end?" Sheriff Logan started to say, "I'm making ward rounds to make sure everyone is all right," he added with a resigned sigh. Nathaniel nodded in understanding and replied, "Yes, it's unfortunate. He could have chosen peace." Ash scoffed behind Nathaniel and Andrew turned to raise an amused eyebrow at him. "I told you he was a psychopath," Ash said, walking towards the right hallway. "Excuse me, boss," he added as he passed by. "Where are you headed?" Andrew asked with a smile. "Hunting for more idiots," Ash responded without looking back, muttering under his breath. "Looks like this town's full of them." Ash had taken 2 steps when he remembered Charles's request. He turned back to head inside to deliver the message first. "I don't think he's too fond of it here," Sheriff Logan said with a sheepish grin. "It's not the town or the people. He's just a grumpy old man with the face of a teenager," Aiden remarked, causing everyone to laugh. After a few moments of light conversation, they entered the ward, where Nathaniel saw Arya's aunt sitting in a corner chair, with Mason resting on her chest. The voices of the twins could be heard coming from a room at the far end of the large space. Miss Everly glanced at Sheriff Logan, a subtle smile appearing on her lips. "I trust everything is fine here, Miss Everly?" Nathaniel asked, noticing Mason's little ear twitch as he tried to lift his head and turn toward his dad's voice. Nathaniel smiled and quickly moved closer, lowering himself to Mason's level, curious to see if his son would recognize him. "Everything is fine," Miss Everly replied in a calm, soothing tone as she gently stroked Mason on the back. "We were shaken when 2 men tried to break in, but Jake took care of it," she added, her voice filled with confidence. Aiden cleared his throat loudly, drawing her attention. "Jake and I actually took care of it," Aiden corrected. Ethan, Alex, Andrew, and Nathaniel chuckled. "Thank you, Aiden," Miss Everly said with a note of appreciation. Sheriff Logan, feeling outnumbered, quickly spoke up. "We've got everything under control, so there's no need to worry about any intruders," he said. Miss Everly nodded and gave him a reassuring smile. "I know you're quite capable, Patrick. That Doug guy must be pretty dense," she said. Alex watched the sheriff, noticing how he stood a little taller, as if the compliment had boosted his pride. A satisfied grin appeared on his weathered face. Alex couldn't help but wonder about the relationship between the two. It seemed like Sheriff Logan might have feelings for Arya's aunt, and he couldn't blame him. The woman was in her late 40s but looked much younger, though her more modest style made Alex think it was a conscious choice. Nathaniel maintained eye contact with Mason, waiting patiently as his son continued to study him closely, his eyes moving rapidly in concentration. "Yes, my boy, it's Daddy," Nathaniel said softly, and a smile slowly spread across Mason's face. "Oh, my heart," Nathaniel murmured as he gently lifted Mason and held him close to his chest. Ethan and Alex stepped up beside Nathaniel, both trying to grab Mason's attention. Ethan leaned in and said softly, "Hello there, I'm your Uncle Ethan," while gently brushing the back of his index finger against Mason's cheek. Mason's eyelids fluttered as he focused on Ethan. "I'm also your godfather, and just wait. I'll teach you how to break hearts way better than your papa," Ethan added with a mischievous grin, drawing laughter from the group and a playful swat on the back from Miss Everly. "No, my Mason is going to be an angel," she replied firmly. I'm sure that's what Nate's mum thought too, Ethan quipped, but I can name at least 100 blondes who'd strongly disagree. The room erupted in laughter. You're an idiot, Nathaniel said in mock seriousness. Hearing their dad's voice, Liam and Owen peeked out from the inner office, both wearing hospital robes. Spotting Nathaniel, they cheered, "Dad!" and ran to him. Nathaniel quickly dropped to his knees as the twins rushed towards him. Holding Mason protectively against his chest, he extended one arm to gather Liam and Owen into a hug. "Dad, did you hear the gunshot?" Owen whispered in his ear. "Yes, Dad. Did you hear?" Liam added, leaning in to whisper as well. "I did." "Were you really scared? I'm so sorry," Nathaniel replied automatically, whispering as if the entire room couldn't clearly hear their conversation. "We weren't really scared, right, Liam?" Owen said, glancing anxiously at his brother. "No, we weren't," Liam agreed, his face lighting up. "Uncle Jake shielded us with his bulletproof body," he exclaimed, his tone full of awe. Jake, listening nearby, grinned at the evident hero worship. Nathaniel smiled. "Did you remember to thank your Uncle Jake?" he asked. The twins exchanged a quick glance before turning to Jake. "Thank you, Uncle Jake," they said in unison. Jake chuckled and gave an exaggerated bow. "You're most welcome, my young princes," he replied with a playful flourish. The twins beamed at him. From the doorway of the pediatrician's office, Evangeline watched the scene unfold with a warm smile. Andrew stood back, observing the room with everyone in his line of sight. He noticed Sheriff Logan shifting nervously on his feet as he edged closer to Miss Everly. Aidan, also noticing the sheriff's subtle movement, walked over to stand beside Andrew. Leaning in, he said, "Are we really going to allow this?" Andrew chuckled quietly. "Give him a break. I get the feeling this has been years in the making," he replied in a low tone. "Helena," Sheriff Logan called softly. Miss Everly turned toward him with a curious look. "A word, please?" the sheriff asked, gesturing towards a side wall with a nod of his head. Miss Everly nodded and followed him. From their vantage point, Andrew and Aidan watched as the sheriff shifted awkwardly before finally speaking. "It's really nice to see you again, Helena. I was, wondering if we could hang out sometime, play catch-up." Jake, noticing Andrew and Aidan's keen interest in the unfolding interaction, joined them. Leaning toward Andrew, he said, We can't really let her out of our sight, so this whole date idea isn't going to work." Andrew's shoulders shook with laughter. "What's wrong with you and Aidan?" he asked in amusement. "He looks like he's going to break her heart, that's what. Look at him, trying to be all smooth and shit," Aidan added. Andrew stifled another laugh. "Look at his hands," he said, motioning toward Sheriff Logan. Then glancing between Aidan and Jake, he added, "That's not a guy trying to be smooth, he's scared out of his mind." "Well, too bad it's too dangerous to let her go off with him to God knows where," Jake said with a shrug. "Unless," Andrew said, a mischievous gleam in his eyes as he excused himself and walked over to Nathaniel. "May I have a minute, boss?" he asked. Nathaniel carefully edged away from the twins, still holding Mason, and followed Andrew to a corner. "Is everything okay?" Nathaniel asked with a hint of concern. "Everything's fine," Andrew replied with a grin. "I was wondering about the bachelorette party. Can we add Sheriff Logan to the mix?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Whoa," he said, glancing over at Ms. Everly and Sheriff Logan deep in conversation. Then with a smirk, he asked, "As one of the strippers?" "Yeah," Andrew replied, folding his arms with a smirk. Nathaniel chuckled. "I want to say no, but I think we might need the guy. A few of us could use some practice. Since he's the sheriff, he'd probably know where we can get training. Not for me, of course. I don't need lessons to strip tease for my woman," Nathaniel quipped, earning a laugh from Andrew. When Sheriff Logan finished his conversation with Miss Everly and approached Nathaniel and Andrew, Nathaniel already had an inkling of what was coming. Mr. Hawthorne, I just asked Helena Everly to have dinner with me sometime, but she didn't think it would be possible unless you could make it happen. Then she invited me over to your place, but," he paused. "That's not the kind of date you want, huh?" Nathaniel probed with an arched eyebrow. Sheriff Logan shook his head, his face reddening. "Do you think you could, help with that?" the sheriff asked hesitantly. Nathaniel thought it was one of the most awkwardly pathetic things he'd ever witnessed. "Am I like this with Arya?" he wondered, dismayed. Keeping a straight face, he replied, "As she said, Sheriff, It's a security risk we're not willing to take. He watched the man's shoulders slump in disappointment before adding, but we have an idea that could be mutually beneficial. Nathaniel grinned, leaving the sheriff visibly confused. Sheriff Logan darted his gaze from Nathaniel to Andrew, as if trying to decipher whether they were both messing with him. Slowly he said, "What do you have in mind?" His tone was hesitant, as though afraid of inadvertently making a deal with the devil. Andrew watched him with an amused smile. "Since this is your territory, I was wondering if you could refer us to a co-ed strip club," Nathaniel asked. Sheriff Logan's brows furrowed into a frown. Andrew thought he looked both relieved and concerned, and the sheriff's next words made it clear why. "Pardon me, but what would you gentlemen need strippers for?" he said, pausing to look directly at Nathaniel before continuing. "You are married to our dear Ariana," he added, then darted his gaze to Andrew and said, "And you, I believe, have your mind set on marrying Anita." A note of displeasure was evident in his voice. "We intend to look, not touch," Nathaniel quipped, feigning seriousness. Sheriff Logan's gaze darkened in anger. "He's joking, please don't take him seriously," Andrew said quickly. Nathaniel chuckled when the older man threw him a cautious look. "You're a good man, Sheriff Logan," Nathaniel said. Andrew went on to explain about the ladies' bachelorette party and Nathaniel's plans to double-cross them. By the time Andrew finished speaking, Sheriff Logan was chuckling. When he glanced at Nathaniel, Nathaniel gave a slight bow, still holding Mason securely to his chest. "You're a cunning one, aren't you?" the older man said. "No, it's not cunning," Nathaniel replied matter-of-factly. "I have issues. I'm a jealous, possessive man, and I think I might consider murder if I saw a man waving his junk in front of my woman." Sheriff Logan laughed, thinking Nathaniel was joking, but when he noticed that neither Nathaniel nor Andrew was laughing, his laughter died down. He gave Andrew a questioning look. In response to the silent query, Andrew shook his head and said, "He's not joking." Sheriff Logan frowned at Nathaniel. "So you may be wondering where you come into this plan. It's your town, it's your people, and you can help keep things hush-hush without me having to call in favors or bring in outside help to make things happen. You make things easier and smoother for me, and I'll make sure you have your own tent with our beautiful Miss Everly," Nathaniel said. Sheriff Logan's gaze grew thoughtful, and a subtle tug appeared at the corners of his lips. "It sounds like something extraordinarily special. Aria and Anita are lucky indeed," Sheriff Logan said. Nathaniel responded, then added, "So are you in?" Sheriff Logan nodded. "It would be insane to say no to that," he replied. "Yeah," Nathaniel said. "We have a bachelorette and bachelor-friendly club you gentlemen would love. The owner is a friend," Sheriff Logan supplied. "Great. Is tomorrow okay to start?" Andrew asked. "I don't see why not. I'll give him a call and get back to you," Sheriff Logan replied. "I can't wait then," Nathaniel said. He leaned in closer to the older man, his grey eyes dark and intense as he added, "Regarding the date with Miss Everly, you can't touch her. A kiss? Maybe. But on a first date? No touching." He drew back and, flashing a smile, strode away with a leisurely gait. Sheriff Logan turned to watch him go. "He's a strange one," he muttered under his breath. Andrew chuckled and said, "He meant it. No touching. He's not the only one who feels strongly about that." When Sheriff Logan threw him a sheepish smile, Andrew gestured to where Aidan was standing with Jake. Sheriff Logan shook his head, chuckling. "You all make me feel like a damn teenager all over again," he said, almost to himself. Then he directed his gaze to where Miss Everly stood with the twins and added, "She's worth it. And more." Andrew smiled. On the other wing of the hospital, Charles and Adam helped Aria and Juliet wheel Ian into the operating theatre toward a large operating table, neatly draped with a blue sterile sheet. Counting to 3, they lifted the older man with the nurse's assistance and placed him onto the table. Aria glanced around the operating room, a wave of nostalgia stirring as she took in its familiar details. Her eyes moved from the walls, painted in a soft, calming shade of mint green, to the overhead cluster of bright surgical lights hovering above the table on adjustable arms. In one corner of the room, advanced medical equipment caught her attention. A ventilator stood beside wall-mounted monitors equipped with control panels. "Thank you, Charles," "And you too, Adam," Dr. Hawthorne greeted, her gratitude evident in her voice. Juliet glanced in Adam's direction. Their eyes met, and with a nod, she gave him a subtle smile. Adam winked at her and stepped back with Charles. When Charles's Torah's phone vibrated in his inner jacket, he excused himself and stepped out. "Baby," he called into the phone just as Rowan hurried down the hallway. Charles waved him into the room and he entered saying, "I'm here. I'm here." Charles returned his focus to the phone call. "Are you okay, darling?" Claire asked from the other end. Charles chuckled. "Am I okay? Honey, are you okay?" he replied, making her giggle. "I'm fine," Claire answered from the other end. "Jake and Aiden got here in time to help us," she added. Charles's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Are you saying you were in danger?" he asked, anger kindling inside him. "Two men came a few minutes before Jake. They tried to break in, but Grace quickly put us in lockdown, so they were only able to break the glass in the door. They left when they couldn't get in, and then Jake came," Claire explained. "I see. I'm sorry you had that experience, babe," Charles said. Hating that Doug was dead, he would have loved just 2 minutes with the bastard, he thought darkly. "It's okay, we were scared for the children, but Jake got here on time," she reassured him. Charles let out a cleansing breath. "I'll come to you as soon as we're done here," he promised, his voice low and husky. "All right, baby, is Dr. Hawthorne in surgery now?" she asked, her voice full of interest. "Yes," Charles replied simply. "All right, see you later, love you," she said. Charles noticed the hesitation in her voice and smiled to himself. He figured she'd get used to saying that to him once he started saying it back. He responded with, "I love you too, baby." The silence followed by her sharp intake of breath made his heart constrict. "I'll tell you more about it when we see each other, okay?" he added. "Okay," Claire replied in a small voice. When Charles ended the call, he looked toward the door of the theater and saw Adam leaning against the doorframe, grinning at him. "What?" Charles snapped. "I'll tell you all about it when we meet," Adam repeated in a feminine tone, making Charles glower at him. When Adam made a kissy face and turned his back at Charles to hug himself, pretending as if someone were holding him, Charles couldn't help but laugh. Then he smacked Adam on the back of the head. "Bloody clown," Charles grumbled fondly. "I saw you giving Dr. Bennett the look. I hope you remembered just how many hours we took to get here," Charles teased. "Or I could steal her and make her move to New York," Adam replied. "It's not that easy, man. She and Dr. Fields signed a contract. No marriage, no children for the first 5 years of resumption to work. If my calculations are correct, they've only used up a year," Charles supplied, subtly warning Adam of what to expect. "It's a good thing I can fly a craft, then," Adam replied. But he grew worried upon remembering he'd been intimate with Juliet without using protection. The last thing he wanted was to put her life in danger for getting involved with him and then leaving her out here alone, saddled with a pregnancy. Something in him reminded him that the relationship had just started and might not even last. The fact that she didn't know what it meant to be with a Hawthorne guard also occurred to him. He thought she might not even like the lifestyle. Still, he figured if there was any chance of it working, he would really like to give it a try. Meanwhile, in the operating room, Aria, Dr. Rowan, and Dr. Bennett, with the assistance of a nurse, had scrubbed in and were ready to begin the operation. Aria decided it was a good time to see Juliet in her element and suggested she take the lead, with Rowan and herself assisting. When Aria noticed Juliet's hands shaking at the suggestion, she met her gaze and said, "You need to forget that Dr. Rowan and I are here, Juliet, and concentrate on the patient." Juliet nodded with a sheepish smile and said, "Sorry, boss," her embarrassment evident. "Don't worry, I understand. It happens to the best of us," Aria reassured her, which made Rowan frown slightly. He couldn't recall a time when that had ever happened to Aria. Noting the look Rowan threw her way, Aria added with a small grin, "I hid it well, that's all," making everyone laugh. The shift from professional to playful helped Juliet relax a bit. Taking a deep breath, she refocused her attention on the surgery. "All right, our mission is to remove part of the pancreas while leaving enough tissue to preserve the patient's health," Juliet announced confidently. "Great, let's get to it," Aria said, stepping in to help carefully position the retractors as Juliet made the first incision. Juliet navigated through the layers of tissue with increasing focus. The surgical nurse prepared the necessary instruments, assisting whenever Juliet and Rowan required an extra pair of hands. Aria, observing closely, stepped in to help with sterile draping when needed. As the surgery progressed, Juliet directed Rowan to assist with freeing the surrounding tissue. Aria watched intently, mentally running through potential complications. When they reached the pancreas, Juliet motioned for Rowan to help expose the tufoschites, taking extra care not to disturb the nearby blood vessels. "Careful there," Aria said softly, her gaze fixed on the critical area. Juliet nodded, pausing briefly to assess the site, then resumed her work with renewed focus. The operation unfolded as a seamless display of teamwork. Aria occasionally offered guidance, though she was satisfied that Rowan and Juliet were fully in control. The nurse managed suction as the surgeons carefully removed the tumor, ensuring there was no bleeding or other complications along the way. Just as Juliet placed the final suture, the patient's heart rate monitor began to beep erratically, the numbers spiking alarmingly. "What's going on?" Rowan asked, his eyes darting to the monitor. "Heart rate's at 140 and climbing," the nurse said, her voice tinged with concern. "Check his oxygen levels," Aria ordered calmly as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the vitals. "All normal," the nurse replied after a moment. Aria nodded in acknowledgement. "It could be the anesthesia wearing off or a stress response. Let's hold on and observe," she said evenly. Juliet felt her own heart pounding as doubt started to creep in. "Did I do something wrong?" she tormented herself internally. But as she glanced at Dr. Hawthorne and Dr. Rowan, noticing neither appeared alarmed, she managed to steady her nerves. "Breathe, Juliet. You know this happens," Aria said, her focus still on the monitor. "Yes, doctor," Juliet responded, though her eyes remained fixed on Ian Blackwood's spiking heart rate. She thought she would truly hate for a patient to die under her care, especially in the presence of her boss. For the next few seconds, the medical team held their breath as Ian's heart rate climbed higher. Aria's eyes darted rapidly as she muttered, "Come on, Ian, you can do this." Then a moment later, the heart rate began to stabilize, the monitor emitting a rhythmic series of beeps once again. "It's back to normal," the nurse confirmed, her tone laced with relief. Juliet exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting to Dr. Hawthorne, who nodded at the metrics report before retreating through the swing door into the adjoining cleaning room. "Good job, Dr. Bennett," Rowan said, addressing Juliet. She gave him a small, hesitant smile, her eyes flicking toward the door Aria had just gone through. Rowan noticed and chuckled, recognizing her silent need for Aria's approval. He gestured for Juliet to follow him into the cleaning room, where they found Aria washing her hands with practiced ease. "You did well, Dr. Bennett," Aria said without hesitation, as if she had sensed Juliet's thoughts. Juliet's face brightened. "Thank you, boss," she replied. Rowan chuckled quietly to himself. By the time Aria emerged from the cleaning room, the nurse had already begun preparing Ian for transfer to the ICU. Rowan and Juliet joined her, and soon they were wheeling Ian down the hallway. Adam accompanied the group, assisting the nurse and Juliet, while Aria, Charles, and Rowan followed closely behind. Once Ian was settled in the ICU, Aria and Rowan left Juliet with the nurse and headed towards the pediatric ward, flanked by Charles and Adam. As they entered the ward, Charles immediately scanned the room and spotted Claire sitting in a corner holding one of the triplets. His eyes briefly flicked to Dr. Hawthorne, who was approaching Nathaniel and Blackwood. Then with a warm smile, visibly relaxing his posture with shoulders drooping, he strode toward Claire. Her face brightened as she watched him approach. Nathaniel, still carrying Mason, met Aria halfway, flanked by Ethan and Alex. "How did it go?" Nathaniel asked, his voice calm and unbothered. He had no doubt that if Ian could be saved, Aria would find a way. Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on Aria, his unspoken question conveyed through the intensity of his stare. "He's fine," Aria replied. "He gave us a scare after the surgery with the blood pressure spike, but he's stabilized now. Dr. Bennett and Rowan did a great job." Ethan nodded in acknowledgement as Nathaniel and Alex gave Rowan friendly pats on the back. "He's in the ICU now," Aria continued. "We'll need to monitor him closely for a few days. Then, after 4 weeks, we'll start him on chemotherapy and radiation therapy." She held Ethan's gaze for a moment, searching for a reaction, but he simply nodded again, his expression unreadable. "I suppose you're going to ask if we can take her back with us to New York?" Ethan said. The other option is to leave him here and keep him in the hospital, Arya replied. Please don't do that, Sheriff Logan cut in from behind them. The group turned to see him standing nearby. That's bound to kill him faster, he added in a grave tone. Sheriff Logan, you're still here? Ethan asked, forcing a strained smile. Apologies for the interruption, Blackwood, but you must realize by now that you're the only reason he's still holding on. With your mother gone, if you abandoned him, there would be no reason for him to keep going, Logan said. Ethan dropped his gaze, frustration simmering inside him. He despised the situation Ian had forced him into. After all these years of pain, how dare Ian want to be part of his life now? Logan stepped closer, joining their circle. I know this is hard for you, but I'm sure Lacey, your mother, would have wanted you to help him. Logan began, only to pause when Ethan snapped his head up, his glare intense. Really? What do you know about it, huh? Ethan asked, his voice taut with barely contained anger. I know she loved him. I know she hated this place, but stayed because she wanted to be near him. Despite everything, Ethan, they loved each other. They just let their pride get in the way, Logan said. He tipped his hat respectfully, then turned and walked towards the exit. For a moment, silence settled over the group. The only sound came from the twins, chatting with Jake and Evangeline in a corner of the room. Ethan sighed heavily and slipped his hands into the pockets of his trousers. From across the room, Isla watched the group while holding Landon, Noria, and Dawn at her side. Gently, she handed Landon to Noria and made her way over to join the others. She hadn't heard what was said, but she was sure it was about Ethan's father. She hoped the man was doing better. Ethan met Nathaniel's gaze, and Nathaniel gave a slight shrug, as if to say he understood Ethan's unspoken question. We have the concierge medical unit, and if he's not comfortable there, we can arrange for him to stay in one of the condos. Accommodation isn't an issue. Your consent is what matters, Nathaniel said. Why do you always do this, Nate? Ethan replied, his voice carrying a hint of emotion. He couldn't fathom why Nathaniel had chosen to befriend him, treating him like a brother and always looking out for him since they'd met. Ethan thought back to how insufferably condescending and haughty he'd been towards Nathaniel in the beginning. Knowing now how unhinged he could be at times, he wondered why Nathaniel hadn't just put him in his place back then. Instead, Nathaniel had been calm and understanding, never faltering in his kindness. I told you I'd always be there, and I intend to keep that promise, Nathaniel said simply. Alex nodded, feeling a twinge of emotion himself. Anna stepped beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. Isla did the same for Ethan, who pulled her closer with one arm while extending his other hand to Nathaniel for a handshake. Nathaniel took it, and the two shook hands. Alex joined them, clasping their hands together. Brothers for life, Alex said. Hear, hear, Ethan and Nathaniel replied lightly. Arya threw Nathaniel a smile and moved closer. Nathaniel instinctively drew her to his side and pressed a kiss on the top of her head. Arya reached out to brush the back of Mason's head, watching as he turned toward her. She beamed at him and watched as his little face broke into an infectious smile before he started to fidget, reaching his tiny hands toward his mum. Arya laughed as Nathaniel joked, I thought we were vibing, son. Soft laughter resounded around the group. Earlier, as Ash stepped outside, he spotted Will standing with Miss Mabel White near the staircase landing. Will's quiet chuckle caught Ash's attention, drawing his focus to their conversation. He heard Miss Mabel White say, I'm sorry, we don't have enough space inside to take in the wounded. If you'd like, I can alert the doctors to treat them out here, and then you can take them away. Ash thought the response was cold, but understood why she wouldn't want the wounded assailants back in the hospital after the chaos they had caused. Joining Will, Ash stood behind Miss White as the police deputies glanced in their direction, their expressions guarded. All right, Miss White, if that's the only option, I'll take it. The roads are pretty treacherous right now, and heading to Hogg County is pure suicide, one of the deputies said. All right then, Miss White replied, turning to look at Ash and Will. Can you spare us some of your people? She asked, her curious gaze settling on Ash. Let me find out, Ash replied, then turned and headed back inside. As he passed the sheriff in the hallway, he noticed the man's keen scrutiny. Ash offered a brief nod in acknowledgement and continued on his way. Reaching the pediatric ward, he saw the Hawthornes and the rest of the group spilling out of the door. Uncle Ash, Liam shouted upon spotting him. The boy broke free from Big Mama's grip and ran toward him. Ash scooped him up, holding him at his side. "How are you, buddy?" he asked. "I'm great," Liam replied, then leaned closer, cupping his hand to whisper in Ash's ear. "I have a deal for you, Uncle Ash." "Aka." Ash grinned. He didn't particularly care for little humans. To be candid, he didn't care much for humans in general. But the little ones were hard to ignore, with their free hugs and smiles that could slowly pull you into their affectionate traps. Liam, unlike his more reserved brother Owen, didn't concern himself with boundaries. Ash suspected Owen had a better grasp of body language, or perhaps understood when someone wasn't in the mood for socializing. Liam, on the other hand, likely recognized these cues too, but simply didn't care. The boy always wanted his way, and once he set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. Ash wondered what kind of deal Liam had in mind this time. "Okay, tell me about it," Ash said, inviting him to elaborate. "Not now. I'll tell you when we get home," Liam replied. "All right then," Ash said. Liam curled his fingers into a fist, holding it up for a bump. Ash chuckled, mimicked the gesture, and bumped fists with him. Watching the interaction, Jake thought it resembled Goliath bumping fists with little David, and the image made him chuckle to himself. "Everything all right out there, Ash?" Andrew asked with interest. "Nope," Ash replied, the smile fading as he turned to face him. "Miss Mabel needs doctors," he added. "Well, it's her lucky day," Arya said before Andrew could respond. She stepped forward, handing Mason back to Nathaniel. Claire, still holding Landon, passed him to Charles, who froze as if caught off guard. Claire burst into laughter, finding it amusing that such a strong, virile man would be hesitant about holding little Landon. "Amateur," Alex scoffed before adding, "Let me have him." Claire handed Landon over to Alex, who surprisingly cradled the baby with care. "Good job," Claire praised, arching an eyebrow at Charles, who quickly protested. "I didn't get any warning," he exclaimed, making everyone laugh. The medical practitioners began following Arya out of the ward, leaving Miss Everly with Nathaniel, Ethan, Alex, Aidan, Anna, Noria, Isla, Andrew, Jake, the twins, Adam, Ash, and Dawn. Jake smiled fondly when Dr. Hawthorne slowed her stride to take Evangelina's hand as they walked away. But when Ash remarked, "They're going to need guards. They're heading out there to treat the enemies," Aidan, Charles, and Adam quickened their steps to join the group. Ethan, considering a visit to Ian, reached for Isla's hand and said, "Excuse us for a bit." Nathaniel nodded in acknowledgement. "Do you need company?" Anna asked. "No thanks. We've got this. Thanks, Boo," Ethan replied with a smile. Anna nodded back, her expression warm. As Ethan and Isla headed down another corridor, Miss Everly suggested, "Maybe we should take the babies home," drawing Nathaniel's attention. "Good idea," Alex said. Nathaniel nodded in agreement, then glanced at Andrew. When Miss Everly added, "I'm sure Patrick wouldn't mind being one of our escorts," Nathaniel paused mid-action, frowning at her. Andrew, Aidan, and Jake, who overheard, burst out laughing. "Ah, I see you've got jokes," Nathaniel said, playfully tugging her hair, which made Miss Everly giggle. "I think it's best we all move at the same time, Miss Everly. I can help with Esme, if that's okay," Jake interjected, not wanting to split the group. He exchanged a glance with Andrew, and Nathaniel immediately caught on. "We can wait in Arya's old office," Nathaniel suggested. "Sheriff Logan can keep watch over the door. From outside," he added. Ms. Everly shook with laughter. "Oh, I feel really anxious for my little Esme," she said. "Why? Is 30 too young to date?" Jake replied. Nathaniel and Andrew roared with laughter. Outside, the doctors worked diligently, while the guards positioned themselves across the snowy grounds. Evangeline paired with Arya and Anita, moving from one wounded assailant to another, with Ash standing nearby, his protective stance akin to a hovering angel. Soon, Dr. Fields arrived, accompanied by Dr. Williams and Dr. Yen, joining the group. Dr. Fields crouched beside one of the wounded, a man clutching his abdomen where blood seeped through his fingers. "Gunshot wound to the lower left abdomen," she said, pulling on gloves and carefully inspecting the injury. "It's not fatal if we get him stabilized." Dr. Rowan approached. "Need help?" he asked. Dr. Fields nodded in confirmation, and the two worked together. "Pressure here," Dr. Yen instructed Grace as she pressed a gauze pad over a deep laceration on another assailant's thigh. "Looks like a knife wound." No major arteries hit, but he's lost a fair amount of blood. Grace quickly signaled a medical assistant to bring over a suture kit. Arya, having already finished tending to 2 of the assailants, stepped back and surveyed the scene. She noted the number of wounded and the conditions of those lying still in the snow. Raising her voice to ensure she was heard, she issued instructions. "Let's start tagging them," she commanded. "Red tags for the deceased, blue for those who are alive but only mildly injured, and yellow for the critical cases that need immediate attention." She turned to Lewis, who had come to stand beside her. "Once the dead are tagged, I want them loaded onto the waiting van for transport to the morgue. Prioritize clearing the area so we can focus on the injured." "Yes, Dr. Hawthorne," Lewis replied, motioning for assistance. One of the Hawthorne guards began distributing red tags from a supply box to the medical staff as they confirmed fatalities. Another team prepared stretchers to transport the bodies to the van. Dr. Williams knelt beside a motionless assailant and checked for a pulse, shaking his head when he found none. "Red tag," he called out. As a tag was handed to him, "Sir," he affixed it to the man's wrist and signaled the guards to remove the body. Nearby, Dr. Fields secured the gunshot victim's wound. "Yellow tag for this one," she called out. Despite the biting cold, the team continued their work. Once all the assailants had been assessed, tagged, and transported, the police took over. With a sigh of relief, Arya stepped between Evangeline and Anita, holding up her gloved hands for a high five. Both women, tired but triumphant, responded with matching smacks. "All right, let's clean up. Our job is done here," Arya announced. A few townsfolk who had come out to watch began clapping. "People, this is when you take a bow," Rowan quipped, prompting laughter among the medical practitioners, who obliged with mock bows. At the hospital entrance, Nathaniel stood with his legs crossed at the ankle, watching the scene unfold with a lazy smile. Isla gave Ethan a sidelong glance, and Ethan, as if sensing her gaze, looked in her direction. The two stared at each other for a moment, with Ethan using his thumb to stroke the inside of her hand. "I'm happy you agreed to help, Ian," she said, almost in a whisper. "Peer pressure," Ethan quipped, making Isla chuckle. Ethan smiled down at her, thinking about how beautiful she looked, and his mind wandered back to everything that had happened since he met her. He thought she couldn't have come into his life at a better time. Despite everything going on around them, Isla had played the role of a quiet companion and supporter. She stayed grounded through it all. The thought that she would make a good wife and mother crossed his mind, and he froze, his steps halting. Isla looked up at him, her gaze searching. Ethan flashed an awkward smile and resumed walking. "Slow down now, champ," he thought to himself. Marriage was way off his plans right now, and he was surprised by the thought. A frown creased his brow. He figured the idea must have snuck into his subconscious as a result of the talk about the bachelorette party and such. Of course, it was also because he had been spending so much time around married couples, Alex and Anna, all lovey-dovey, Anita and Andrew, Jake and Evangeline, Charles and Claire, Aidan and Nariah, and Nathaniel and Ariana with their cute babies. He scowled into space. They were clearly affecting him. He wasn't ready for something so permanent, right? He had his work in the Middle East, and with Ian's nonsense he couldn't wait to leave, but the thought of what he would be leaving behind gnawed at him, and he found himself comparing his life now to when he and Alex were abroad. For a brief moment, Ethan entertained the idea of returning and forming a partnership with Alex and Nathaniel to start a new company focused on industrial chemicals. He shook his head, unwilling to let the thought take hold, but deep down, he knew it was already too late. "If I could convince Nathaniel to relocate his family to Dubai, do you think you'd be willing to visit too?" he asked, looking at Isla, half joking, half serious, wondering if she'd be open to the idea of a long-distance relationship. Isla smiled shyly at him, her lashes fluttering in a playful manner. "That's an unusual way to invite me halfway across the world," she replied. Ethan grinned and nudged her lightly. "Come on, say yes. You know you'll miss me," he teased, making her laugh. "I'm genuinely interested in your life over there, and, of course, I'd love to visit." "You don't have to mention my boss to sweeten the deal," she said in a soft, sultry tone. Ethan laughed, appreciating her charm. He couldn't stop gazing into her captivating eyes. Feeling an irresistible pull, he lowered his head and kissed her lips, still holding her gaze. "If you want, you can join me when we leave. I think Anna will be coming with us, so you'd have some company," he suggested, his voice low and husky. "I'd love that, but..." she started to say, but Ethan pressed a kiss to her lips. When he pulled back, he shook his head at her and said, "Don't you dare say no to me," his voice low and carrying a hint of a snarl. Isla took a deep breath at the dark promise in his eyes. She remembered when Dr. Yen had mentioned that getting involved with Will would ruin her life. Isla had never felt a statement resonate with her so deeply. She knew exactly what Dr. Yen meant, the burning desire that consumed you, igniting you to the point of feeling as though it would destroy you. It burned wildly, making you ache, and all you wanted was relief, as if you were addicted to him. Ethan, noticing how her eyes moved from his to his lips with that bewitching green gaze, kissed her again and again, his body and mind coming alive for her with ardent intensity. He only stopped when he heard giggles and murmurs from people passing by. "Rain check," he murmured into her ear. Isla nodded, still clinging to him. Upon reaching Ian's room, Ethan saw the red-haired doctor standing by Ian's bedside, with Adam and a man in a nurse's uniform flanking the bed, helping the doctor hold Ian down. His father's body was trembling violently, his arms shaking as if caught in a chill. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight. Ian Blackwood, usually strong and composed, now vulnerable and disoriented. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, stepping forward, his voice tight and full of concern. The nurse glanced quickly at him, then at the doctor. "He's experiencing post-surgical tremors. We're trying to stabilize him, but it might take a moment." Dr. Bennett responded in a calm tone. Meeting Ethan's gaze, she added, "His body is still reacting to the anesthesia and the stress of the surgery. He may also be feeling some pain, which could be exacerbating the shaking." Ethan's eyes flicked to Adam, who gave him a nod of reassurance. Then his attention turned back to his father's face, pale, sweaty, and strained with discomfort. Ian's eyes were wide open, his pupils dilated, and his breathing coming in shallow, rapid bursts. Ethan could see the fear and helplessness in his father's expression, and it tugged at his heart. "I told Juliet, Dr. Bennett, about Ian's abuse at the hands of his family. This could also be a result of that. I know trauma when I see it," Adam said quietly. Ethan nodded, his heart tightening. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over him. He instantly thought that Ian deserved whatever he got, but still he felt a tightness around his heart, as if someone were gripping it in a fist. The emotions stung, bringing tears to his eyes. "What can I do?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked from Dr. Bennett to Adam. "Talk to him," Adam said, his voice low and filled with an eerie gravity. "Remind him you're here." Juliet looked at Adam with a searching gaze, wondering what kind of trauma this strong, virile man might be carrying. Ethan took a sidelong glance at Isla, who gave him an encouraging nod. He stepped forward as Dr. Bennett stood back, giving him space. Standing close to the bed, Ethan placed a hand on his father's shoulder, gently squeezing. "Dad," he called softly, his voice trembling. "I'm here. You're safe. It's going to be all right." Ethan's voice cracked slightly as he glanced toward Adam for reassurance. Adam nodded in approval. Ian's eyes flickered toward Ethan. Adam watched as a flicker of recognition slowly broke through the fog of distress in Ian's gaze. Ethan gingerly reached down, brushing his father's clammy hair away from his forehead. The tremors didn't stop, but Ian's gaze softened at the sound of his son's voice. "Dad," Ethan whispered again, his voice rough with emotion. "I have got you. Ariana and we've got you," he said, his eyes blurring with unshed tears. Juliet exchanged a knowing glance with Adam, who gave her a small, approving smile. He might not have attended medical school, but he understood the power of comfort and reassurance from someone who mattered. Ethan kept his hand on his father's shoulder, his thumb moving back and forth in slow, soothing strokes. With a glance at the nurse, Ethan stepped closer and slowly climbed onto the bed. The nurse quickly removed the pillows, giving him enough space to sit behind Ian. Carefully, Ethan positioned himself so Ian could lean back against him, cradling his father securely. Ethan was struck by how frail Ian felt in his arms, his once strong frame seeming almost weightless. The realization hit him hard, tightening the ache in his chest and threatening to overwhelm him. The red-haired doctor observed the scene, nodding slightly as she noted the shift in Ian's demeanor. "Keep doing that, Mr. Blackwood, it's helping," she said softly. Adam noted the smile and surprise in her voice. The tremors gradually began to subside. Ian's breathing steadied, his tense body relaxing little by little. The wild fear in his eyes faded, replaced by exhaustion. Ethan didn't say a word, simply holding his father close, providing an anchor as Ian's body continued to fight the residual effects of the surgery. The room grew quieter, the tension dissipating with every passing moment. The trembling eventually ceased, Ian's chest rising and falling at a calmer, more natural rhythm. His eyes drifted shut, his features softening as he sank into a more peaceful sleep. Ethan stayed on the bed, his arms still wrapped around his father's frail shoulders, unwilling to move just yet. "Thank you," Dr. Bennett said softly, her gaze on Ethan. "It seems your presence made all the difference. He'll need plenty of rest now." Ethan nodded and started to gingerly ease off the bed. Adam stepped in to help hold Ian steady while Ethan released him. Together, Adam and the nurse gently repositioned Ian on the bed, ensuring he was comfortable. Ethan glanced toward Isla and noticed tears streaming silently down her face. He crossed the room to her, drawing her into a comforting hug. "I'm sorry," Isla whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Don't be," Ethan replied quietly, his lips brushing the top of her head in a gentle kiss. "I understand." Breaking away slightly, Ethan turned to Adam, his tone resolute but calm. "Adam," he called, drawing the man's attention, "can you let Andrew know I'd like Ian moved home with us as soon as possible?" Adam gave a short nod of acknowledgement before leaving the room to give Andrew a call. Juliet quickly excused herself and followed Adam into the hallway, realizing this might be her only chance to speak with him alone before he left with her patient. "Yes, Dr. Hawthorne, he had another episode, but he's stable now. Dr. Bennett is still with him, along with one of the ICU nurses," Adam said into his phone, leaning casually against the wall. As Juliet stepped out of the room and quietly shut the door behind her, Adam glanced at her, grinned, and pulled the phone away from his ear. "Sorry, Doc. Just a quick call," he said with a playful tone, clearly poking fun at her for how she was such a Karen on their first meeting. Juliet held back a laugh, shaking her head at him. Then she held still, a slight frown crossing her face as she realized it had only been hours since they'd met. "That can't be right," she murmured under her breath, marveling at how it felt like she'd known Adam for years instead of mere hours. Her eyes lingered on him as he finished his call. His tall, muscular frame, clean military haircut, and sharp, rugged features caught her attention. She sighed, remembering how protective he'd been in the past few hours, a quality she found both comforting and disarming. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have something real with someone like him. "Okay, boss," Adam said, ending the call. He pocketed his phone and turned his full attention to Juliet. As she approached, her steps slow and tentative. When she was within arm's reach, Adam extended his hand to gently draw her a little closer. His eyes sparkled with warmth as he smiled down at her. "You look like you've got something on your mind, Doc," Adam teased. "Maybe," she replied in a soft, playful tone, then added almost in a whisper, "I just had a great time with you, that's all." Adam considered a witty response, but saw the sincerity in her eyes. Instead, he nodded and said, "I had a great time too, Juliet," his voice low and gruff. She hesitated before speaking again, her eyes flickering as if she was searching for the right words. "Now that Doug is in police custody, I suppose I'm expected to return to my average life back in my apartment?" she said, her tone tinged with uncertainty. Adam noticed that Juliet hadn't heard about Doug's death, but not wanting to derail the conversation, he decided to let it go. "Is that what you want? To go back to your apartment?" Adam asked, his gaze growing intent as he began to pull back slightly, both emotionally and physically. "No," Juliet whispered, and the word barely audible. Adam blinked, his focus snapping back to her. "No, huh?" he echoed. She nodded and leaned closer, her eyes locked on his. "Why don't you come over instead?" she asked, her voice soft and flirtatious. Adam shook his head gently. "I can't do that, babe," he said matter-of-factly. Juliet felt the sting of the rejection and began to withdraw, her expression faltering. "Oh," she murmured, her voice small as she started to pull back. But before she could pull away completely, Adam reached for her, his hand cupping the back of her neck, holding her still as he looked deeply into her eyes. "I need to warn you about something," he said in a firm tone. "With me, you're either all in or all out. There's no in between. Do you understand me?" Juliet held his gaze, her heart increasing its pace as she slowly nodded. "I'm a bodyguard, Juliet. I may live an elite lifestyle, but at the end of the day I'm still a bodyguard," Adam said calmly. "So, I can't come to be with you at your place. If you want me, you'll have to let me take the lead," he said. "Do you want to be with me?" Juliet asked, her cheeks flushing at the question. She never thought she'd be asking a man like Adam something so bold. She also never imagined giving her virginity to someone she barely knew. But with him, it felt like everything was different. There were so many firsts with this mysterious man. "Yes, Juliet, I want you," Adam replied, offering her a warm, genuine smile. "I want you too," Juliet said softly, feeling a little shy. "Good," Adam said, grinning. "Because since you're Ian's doctor, you're moving in with us." Juliet blinked in surprise, but before she could respond, Adam leaned in closer, his voice low as he said, "And I'm really looking forward to spending another night with you, Juliet." Her insides melted, a warm feeling spreading through her like marshmallow softness. As the Hawthornes returned inside the hospital to see Ian Blackwood before heading out, Lewis watched as Cassandra separated from the group and headed in a different direction. He hesitated for about a minute before deciding to follow her. Upon reaching a crossroads in the hallway, he peered left, then right, and spotted Cassandra entering a room marked with a restroom sign mounted on the wall. Glancing back briefly, Lewis ventured forward, walking casually towards the restroom entrance. Leaning in, he pressed his ear to the door and thought he heard a muffled sob, his brows knitted in concern as he waited. When he heard another faint sob, he gently pushed the door open and peered inside. Cassandra's startled gaze snapped to him. Seeing it was Lewis, she attempted a smile, but her trembling lips betrayed her emotions. Without a word, Lewis stepped in and closed the door behind him, locking it with a soft click. He then opened his arms and Cassandra rushed into them, pressing herself against him. Lewis in turn wrapped his arms tightly around her, raising his left hand to cradle the back of her head, gently pressing her face to his pectorals. "You can cry. Let it out. I won't judge," Lewis said with a light-hearted tone, his deep voice resounding in the quiet space. Despite herself, Cassandra chuckled softly, tightening her hold on him. Lewis lowered his head, pressing his nose into her hair, and inhaled her soft floral scent, a soothing mix of lavender and jasmine. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Mrs. Griffin almost got killed. Dr. Williams too. He kept trying to get between me and Doug. I'll never get used to civilians carrying guns around like toys," she murmured against his chest, her British accent more pronounced. "I suppose you don't do that in the UK?" Lewis asked casually. He already knew civilian gun ownership was rare there, but wanted to give her space to share her thoughts, to let her feel heard. "No, we don't," Cassandra replied, shaking her head slightly. "We're more into knives," she added with a weak attempt at humor. Lewis chuckled softly. "Welcome to America, I guess," he asked softly. Cassandra chuckled as well, her grip on him tightening. She stayed pressed against him, finding comfort in his warm embrace and the rugged, earthy scent that clung to him, like pine needles and the faint trace of fresh rain on moss. For now, it was enough just to hold on to him, letting his presence soothe her. "What became of Doug? What did Will do to him?" Cassandra asked, her voice low and lined with vulnerability. "Will beat him up and handed him over to the sheriff. He then stabbed a deputy and the sheriff and I shot him. He's dead and no longer a problem," Lewis replied in a low, casual tone. Cassandra drew back slightly, her eyes widening as she gaped at him. "You're saying Doug is dead?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Lewis nodded. "Yes. He and his men have been sorted and taken to either the county morgue or another hospital. I believe Ms. White didn't want them here," he added. "That's..." Cassandra started to say, but hesitated. She cast him a furtive glance, biting the corner of her lip before continuing. "Do you think it's horrible of me to feel relieved?" she asked, her pale, beautiful face etched with worry. Lewis chuckled softly. "No, Cassie. You're allowed to be human. he teased, gently stroking her bottom lip with his thumb. Cassandra let out a relieved sigh. "I suppose we're free to go back home now," she said with a smile. But as the implications of her words dawned on her, the smile slowly faded, and she gave him an intense, searching look. "No, you're not. Remember, Jake is supposed to help you secure a place on Everly Ranch," Lewis reminded her. Cassandra nodded, lowering her gaze. Lewis placed a finger under her chin, gently lifting her face so she was forced to meet his eyes. "It's safer for you there. Even when we leave, you'll have our people at the estate watching out for you," Lewis explained. Cassandra nodded again, but Lewis noticed her expression had changed. The gleam of happiness that had been in her eyes just moments ago was gone. "When will you be leaving?" she asked in a small voice. "I'm not sure, but I know we're not spending Christmas here," Lewis said. She nodded again, and Lewis realized why her mood had shifted. "Would you, like to see me again?" Lewis asked, surprising himself. He wasn't supposed to get entangled with anyone at this point in his life, perhaps not for a long time, but he wasn't quite ready to tell Cassandra Fields goodbye just yet. "Which do you think is better?" she responded, tilting her head slightly as she looked up into his eyes. A feeling of defeat and loss gripped her inside. "Should we say goodbye now, or wait until it would hurt more?" she added, a note of sadness in her voice. Lewis paused to study her beautiful face and those glistening, captivating eyes. "You're saying we should quit before it begins?" he asked, wondering if, like him, she wasn't looking for a relationship. She shrugged. "It'll hurt less," she replied, with a quick flash of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The notion of it hurting more implies you already like me to some extent, Cassie," Lewis replied, a voice in his head questioning why he would even say that when she was giving him a perfect chance to walk away. He reached up and cupped her face in his large hands, his slim fingers gently stroking the sides of her face. Cassandra smiled up at him, silently wondering why he wasn't taking the opportunity she was offering to free himself from her. He seemed too good to be true. His reaction to her medical condition was still fresh in her mind. She wondered if he hadn't fully considered the weight of her condition yet, and she feared that if they went further, the moment he truly grasped it and decided to walk away would be far more devastating. Lewis watched the sad play of emotions in her eyes as she gazed at him with adoration. He could sense she was building a wall in her mind, preparing herself for the separation she believed was inevitable. He knew he should walk away and let her be, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Lifting her up, he watched the surprise and bemusement flash across her face as he placed her on the washroom counter, fitting himself between her legs. He cupped the side of her neck as he leaned in and kissed her slowly. "Lewis," Cassandra whispered, her voice filled with longing as he nibbled on her lips. One of his hands wrapped around her left thigh began inching up her dress. "I love challenges and danger. Quitting before delving in doesn't sound like something I could do, Dr. Fields," he murmured against her lips before deepening the kiss, preventing her from responding. He lifted her slightly, his fingers hooking into the hem of her panties and shifting them aside to make room. Cassandra trembled, her breathing growing shallow as she wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, kissing him back with the same ardent passion he was giving her. "Stay with me, Cassie," Lewis said, barely recognizing his own voice. He wondered if he had completely lost his mind. "Yes," Cassandra managed to reply, her voice trembling as her body quivered with pleasure. "Lewis," she moaned with a halting voice. "I've got you, beautiful. Don't hold back," Lewis answered, his voice deep and hoarse. Afterward, Cassandra seemed to come back to her senses as it dawned on her that she and Lewis had just had sex in the hospital restroom, meant for the female doctors. "Oh my God, Lewis," she exclaimed. His low chuckle prompted her to swat him playfully on his broad chest. Lewis leaned in to plant a quick kiss on her lips before stepping back. Cassandra covered her face, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I can't believe we did that," she said, her voice muffled through her hands. "Did what, Dr. Fields?" Lewis teased in a neutral tone. Cassandra looked around for something to throw at him, but before she could act, he strode out, still chuckling. Letting out a deep sigh, Lewis stood against the wall outside the restroom door and waited. When Cassandra stepped out, she was surprised to see him still there. "I thought you left," she said with a shy smile. I would have, if I thought you were completely safe, he replied. Cassandra felt her heart swell with emotion, her lips curving into a smile. The two began walking together to rejoin the others. Cassandra could still feel the lingering effects of their lovemaking between her legs. She wanted to touch him, to feel some kind of connection, and smiled when he reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Could it be that he felt the same way? She cast him a sidelong glance. By the time Lewis and Cassandra joined the others, Ian was already being moved out of the ICU to a waiting ambulance that would take him to the Everly Ranch. When Arya spotted Cassandra and noticed her swollen eyes, she moved to meet her. "Are you okay, Dr. Fields?" Arya asked, her tone laced with concern. Cassandra nodded appreciatively. "I am now, thank you," she replied. Soon enough, the group headed out. Liam, wanting to stay close to his Uncle Ash, hurried to grab his hand. Owen quickly joined in, taking hold of Ash's other hand. Ash's brows furrowed, puzzled. Normally the boys would gravitate toward Jake, not him. He glanced back at Jake, who chuckled at the bewildered look on Ash's face. Jake was certain Liam was up to something, and whatever it was, it most definitely involved Ash. That was probably why the little imp was sticking to him like glue. Outside, as Ash moved towards the jeep designated to take Arya and Nathaniel back to the ranch, Liam tugged at his hand and led him to another vehicle carrying the doctors. Ash glanced back, searching for Jake, who was now openly laughing at the scene. Jake gestured for Ash to go along, and with a resigned sigh, Ash complied. Jake then drew Evangeline close, shepherding her after Ash and the twins. "The twins are riding with me," Jake announced, ensuring Nathaniel, Dr. Hawthorne, and Andrew would take note. Nathaniel paused, frowning as he looked toward the other jeep and saw the boys clinging to Ash. He sighed and ushered Arya inside the jeep with Miss Everly. Andrew, meanwhile, noticed Sheriff Logan standing nearby, watching intently as Miss Everly climbed into the vehicle. The sheriff then returned to his jeep and tailed them all the way back to the entrance of the Everly Ranch before leaving. Once they arrived at the house, Andrew noted that Tom and Justin had returned, but Tristan was nowhere to be seen. As the vehicles parked and the group spilled out, Liam called out to Justin. "Good afternoon, mister. Where's Tristan?" he asked. Ash noticed the awkward glance Justin threw in Mr. Hill's direction before replying, "He's, visiting his grandparents. He'll be back tomorrow." His voice was hesitant. "Grandparents," Ethan muttered with a scowl. He thought Justin was the most foolish person ever, letting Tristan go with Pamela's parents. "All right," Liam said to Justin, but instead of following his parents toward the house, he began pulling Ash in another direction. Where are you going?" Ash asked, a trace of panic in his voice. "Away from the adults." "We have to discuss the proposal," Liam replied. "Yep," Owen confirmed. Ash allowed himself to be led away, though he looked back once more. When he saw Jake and Aiden following them, he felt a bit more at ease.